Hello, and welcome to the very first Tech Tip Tuesday with your favorite tech director, Amanda Porter. And today we're going to go through an introduction to computers in both terminology and computer care. So when we talk about computers, we basically break it down into two main components: the hardware of a computer system and the software. The hardware are the physical parts of the computer. And I've got several different types of hardware listed here. Some might be more obvious, like a keyboard, mouse, screen. You can see those, you can touch those. But a lot of the other ones that are listed are actually what's kind of inside the box or inside the laptop. But they are essential in allowing your computer to run. So I'd like to kind of review some of this terminology for you, so it's not just acronyms that are thrown at you, so you actually know what a CPU is, the purpose of it, RAM. This is going to come in handy understanding what this hardware is and its function within the computer, as to some of the care tips that I'm going to follow up with afterwards, and why it's important, why you need to do some of the things that will make me happy versus some of the things that make me grumpy, and why that is.
Components that make a computer work. You may already know that there are many important parts inside a computer, but what exactly do they do? Let's take a look inside and learn about the various components that make a computer work. Whether it's a desktop computer or a laptop, every computer has a large circuit board called a motherboard. This contains some of the most important parts of the computer, such as the CPU, also known as the Central Processing Unit or processor. The CPU can be considered the brain of the computer because it processes information and carries out commands. Since it tends to get hot, it's covered by a piece of metal called a heatsink, which draws heat away from the processor. The motherboard also contains the computer's RAM, or random access memory. This is the short-term memory that the computer uses whenever it's performing calculations. However, you cannot store your files there because the RAM is cleared when you shut off the computer. The hard drive provides long-term storage, keeping all of the computer's data even when it's turned off. Many hard drives use a magnetic platter to store data, but many newer computers have solid-state drives, which are faster and more durable, but also more expensive. On many desktop computers, the motherboard has expansion slots that allow you to upgrade by adding expansion cards. You can add a video card to get better graphics performance, or you can add a wireless card to connect to your wireless home network. Most laptops, however, don't have expansion slots. Of course, the computer's components need electricity to run. The power supply unit is designed to take power from the wall outlet and send it to all of the different components that need power. Laptops also contain a built-in battery that lets you use them anywhere. A computer is a pretty complex machine, but now that you've seen what goes on inside, it should be a little less mysterious. You may already...
Okay, so to make it a little bit more relatable, when you're first introducing computers, generally it's a lot easier to introduce them as a desktop because the hardware is a little bit bigger. It's not soldered together to make it fit within this compact area like it is within a laptop. So it's a lot easier to define the hardware pieces to understand what they were, especially back when they were first created. We used to be able to take the different pieces of hardware and swap it out in the machine. So, when I first started in technology, many times when computers parts would go bad on it, we would still keep the computer and we'd be able to swap out different pieces. Like we could swap out the keyboard, we could swap out the RAM, we could swap out hard drives. It was a lot easier back in the day, and especially with desktops, that's still somewhat true. But with laptops, they have changed things so much more to be almost this all-in-one kind of soldered machine, so that you as an end user have to spend the big bucks to just, oh, you can't just replace the battery, or you can't just replace your speakers, or you can't just replace the RAM. You pretty much, get rid of the machine and then buy a brand new one, right? It gets the end user or the consumer to continue to buy a computer. So when you look, what this picture is right now is, if we took off the lid on your MacBook on the very bottom, if we unscrewed that, this is what you would see. And what's pretty crazy about that, and all those hardware components that were just discussed, let me draw for you. So this, and this are all the battery on a MacBook. The piece here in the middle, that's going to be your trackpad. So basically where you have the mouse that you click on. So it's kind of as if you took the laptop, flipped it upside down, and took the back cover off. So that is going to be your trackpad, the battery. This and this are your speakers. This little piece right here is the connector. So going between what's right here, which is basically going to be your logic board or motherboard, and I'll show you on the next slide what that kind of looks like on your MacBook. That's all your brains in the computer, is just that tiny little piece, all those different pieces of hardware they just mentioned, the RAM, CPU, the hard drive. Everything is kind of soldered together on that logic board on your MacBook. So you can see what takes up the big majority of it's your battery. And there's not a lot to it. They've really gotten creative in how they've been able to kind of compact everything. But again, like I said, when things go wrong, instead of swapping out the RAM, swapping out a hard drive, you pretty much have to get a whole new logic board, which is basically a brand new machine when things go wrong. And this isn't unique to just Macs. A lot of Windows machines have, especially laptops, have moved in this direction. So all right. So this, I didn't tell you guys what this was. This is actually goes in between the motherboard or the logic board and the screen. So that it's basically like a cable kind of runs in the middle of the machine. And that's, like if you bend your screen too far back and you break that cable, then that connection between sending the information from essentially your computer to the screen is going to be disturbed, or you end up with lines or something. So that's why it's important not to bend that screen back too much, because there is a cable that runs in between those two components. So if we take a look at that motherboard, these are all those hardware components are just soldered together on essentially that one little board. Right here, Apple has now created their own proprietary in-house CPU. So back in the day, it was just Intel or AMD were manufacturers of CPUs. You can still, if you go buy many machines, that's who you're going to find. And Apple decided to get creative, get some architects on board, and they designed their own processor. So again, more money comes into their pockets. It's easier. They can make a better product within in-house. But yeah, that would be the CPU. This right here is going to be your RAM. So your random access memory. That is important. RAM is called, it's volatile memory. So what that means is it needs power in order to be used. And so what is stored in RAM when the machine is on are your open programs. So when you open up a web browser and you open up Zoom and you open up PowerPoint, all of those things while you're using them, those programs exist in RAM. As soon as you shut your computer down, RAM empties, which is a very important concept that we'll talk about here shortly. I believe this is your Wi-Fi. I think this is technically your solid state drive or chip. So anything that would be non-volatile, so things like an external hard drive or a thumb drive, those things where you save your data Those are non-volatile, meaning they don't need power to retain that information. That's where you save your documents. That's where you install your programs to run them and open them while you're actively using the computer. That is what gets is in RAM. Okay. So I'm not going to go over all the pieces, but I just wanted you to see how kind of the insides of your MacBook, what it looks like, and honestly, kind of how intricate it is. So the other half of that, on the other side of the house, you have your hardware, the physical parts. They all have specific tasks that they or purposes that they are used for within your computer. And the other side is the software, right? Just because it's you got those physical parts together, if you don't actually have any software to be run on it, which software is the executable instructions that tell the computer how to perform a task. And we break that down into either application software or system software. So, right, you're trained to hit a power button and things just happen. Well, that's because of system software. System software are the programs that are needed for hardware to operate, the main one being your operating system. So that would be something like Windows 10 or your Mac OS. So maybe you're running Mojave, maybe you're running, they've got different versions of their software that basically run the entire system and provide an interface for you that's user friendly. So it's not just an old prompt. If you've ever seen an old DOS prompt where it's just, black with some white writing, you actually have an interface, sometimes called a GUI, graphical user interface, that you can use that make it a much more welcoming, pleasant experience as opposed to what it could be. So that's where, operating systems are important, and then drivers, firmware. So sometimes if you've ever had, maybe you installed a printer at home, sometimes you have to download drivers. So then that way your computer understands how to interact with that hardware. Again, printers are a type of hardware. They're actually considered something we call output because it takes information from the computer and outputs it to a user, where that system software allows us to utilize the hardware. Application software are programs specifically made for the end user. So to accomplish a task, something like Microsoft Word, Google Chrome. So while this might be a little confusing, web browsers are software. So things like Firefox, Google Chrome, Safari, that's software that allows you to access pages on the internet where, sometimes people just say the word Google or Google Chrome, they don't understand the difference. Google itself is a website called a search engine that has different websites broken down and indexed for end users. It has a specific purpose, and it's a website, is Google, where Google Chrome is software, it's application software, and it's a web browser that allows you to browse pages on the internet. Just wanted to make that clarification. So then you have Adobe Photoshop too, which is even more specific type of application software. So again, something maybe like Word or Google Chrome is a standard end user piece of software. Adobe Photoshop is going to be more of a specialized type of software. Okay, so why are we talking about hardware and software? Well, I wanted to define some of those things before we talk about computer care. And really, in passing, maybe I see your guys' computers and I might make some comments to you like, hey, you shouldn't do that, or you should do this. And the things that make me grumpy that I hear or maybe I see is when someone tells me they've never shut down their laptop or they don't restart their computer. And the problem with that is you are never clearing out RAM. So that random access memory that constantly is being used with programs, it never gets what we call flushed. It never kind of gets reset. And I'm going to show you guys something using an activity monitor that you can use on your laptop to prove to you how important this is to shut down, restart your machine. Along the same lines, leaving dozens of tabs open in your web browser, you are going to, really cause some problems for your computer if you are never giving it a break. And if you just have all these things open all the time, and programs running, again, they become stale. They can, sometimes your browser might need a firmware update because there's a security threat, or and that's really another one where if you're not restarting, you're not ever closing out and quitting your browser, those things can't happen and can become security risks too on top of it. So again, along the same lines, ignoring those software and security updates. So, but the bad guys have gotten even more confusing in the sense that they push out certain websites. I've seen it over the years, different things that people have gotten that look like a pop-up, like it's supposed to be an update to their browser, and in fact it's not. It's a pop-up to a link to a virus. So certainly, the IT departments, we use something called Jamf, which is our mobile device management system that we try to use to manage all of our Apple products. And we're trying to get a little bit better about pushing out some of those updates instead of having you guys do them yourselves. But it is something we're going to try to work with you to get those updates. I mean, sometimes, I have reservations about it because we don't want to update things too soon sometimes because they haven't worked all the bugs out. And I've seen where that's been a bad decision. So, certainly we want to get in the swing of, communicating to you guys if and when, what kind of updates we should be doing, and utilizing those tech integrators in your buildings to communicate that information to you guys if and when you should be doing any updates. This is another one that I get cranky about, is if the laptop covers. So if you feel your laptop and you looked at that image that we just had, that's a lot of battery. That's a lot of heat. There's not a lot of room. They use things like thermal paste and certain pieces of hardware to try to pull that heat away from that CPU, but the CPU is the expensive piece of your machine, and that's what's doing all the calculations and execution of tasks basically within your computer, that if it gets overheated, right, you're not going to have a computer anymore. And so everything, all of the hardware, not just the CPU, but that's why they put the heat sink usually, or thermal paste, on top of that, because it's the expensive piece. It's doing all the execution, probably generating the majority of the heat in your machine to pull it away. But if you're blocking airflow, so having papers stacked up around your machine, or having just, again, those cases couldn't be worse for your laptop. And then my last one, at least we'll keep it to these 5 for today. Saving your files and documents to the computer and not backing them up. I have no problem. You'll see in a minute, my desktop, I have a lot of items on my desktop too, but I don't have so many that they're overlapping each other and I couldn't find anything even if I wanted to. I have it organized by folders, and I really try to minimize it, because on startup, it has to load all that data. Whenever you turn off your machine, turn it back on. And the biggest thing that you want to avoid is, again, at any point in time, you can have a hardware failure or you can have a software failure. Maybe you update and something happens along the way. Unfortunately, there's no 100% guarantees. So that's why it's always important to back up your documents to the cloud. Okay, so on the other side of the house, what can you do to make your tech director happy? Restart your computer on a weekly basis. I would say minimally, you should try to get in the habit of restarting every Friday. I know so many people just close the lid and they pick it back up where it left off, but and then we get tickets where, hey, Schoology's not working right, or this website's not loading for me. And really what ends up happening is, because someone just had 100 tabs open in their browser, or they didn't restart their computer, it does lead to problems over time. So I would minimally request that everyone start to restart your computer at least on a weekly basis. And instead of just leaving tabs open, so I've seen where people have had, you know, every single one of their courses in Schoology open in a different tab, those pages become stale. And what I mean by that is how a website works is it goes out on to the internet, right? And when you type in a URL, that URL is essentially a server that you're accessing to pull a file down to show in your browser. It's just written in different languages, you know, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. There's different programming languages that allow those pages to look a certain way within your web browser, right, which we learned as software, and that web browser interprets those languages and can display it the way that we see it to be. So if you just leave those tabs open, you're not actually pulling down the newest or most recent version of that page. You know, maybe Schoology pushed out some updates to the layout and you know, to load some of the other pieces around the page, not just the stuff that you changed on your Schoology course, aren't going to load correctly. So really my recommendation is to use bookmarks. You know, I can show you my Safari here in a minute, how many bookmarks I have. There's unfortunately way too many. But that's how I navigate through things, because I want the most recent, most up-to-date page that I'm pulling down. Running those security and software updates, again, we're going to try on the back end to manage it a little bit better with Jamf. But otherwise, you know, if you see something pop up that you need an update for your software, you know, a lot of them that I say you really probably need to stay on top of the most are web browsers, just because that's where, you know, again, threat actors, the bad guys, they'll try to infiltrate that way many times if there's a bug or a hole within the web browser. And ensuring that airflow around the computer, you know, the computers are a tool and they definitely need some love. So you want to make sure that, you know, you're not leaving it in a car in the very middle of winter. Really cold temperatures. So if you leave for the day and you leave your laptop in the car and you come to school the next day and you power that on, that is a terrible idea, in the sense that if there's any kind of moisture that's got on into that computer, and then now you try to fire it up, you can do some damage. Back in the day, computers aren't so much anymore a rotating platter for the hard drive, but when they were, and you had like spinning, physically moving parts, and if there was any kind of moisture or ice buildup, you could do some damage to your hard drive. But it's still my recommendation, always keep it inside with you, especially in the winter and in the summer. You don't want it sitting in the heat either in your car. So in just as probably a principle, don't leave it in your car because it could get stolen as well. So just don't leave it in your car. Bring it in your house, leave it at school, one of those two things. And make sure that you don't have it stuffed around papers or put a whole bunch of stuff on top of it, and then that stress, that weight from books or something can bend the screen, anything like that. And then my last one is to just limit the number of files you save to the computer. That, you know, if it's something that you're accessing daily, and if, how I say it to myself is, if I drop my laptop right now and I couldn't get it to work again, am I okay? And if the answer is no, you need to put those files on the cloud. You know, we encourage everyone to use Google Drive because it's saved essentially on a server somewhere else. And they back up those servers, ensure that that data is going to exist and be there for you. Whereas you can't always guarantee that with your computer. Okay, so last but not least, the last thing I want to do is actually show you there's some software on your computer called an activity monitor. And if I go to the launch pad, oh boy, Zoom is in my way. And I search for Oops. Hang on a second. There we go. Activity. You'll see this tool pop up. And what it does, it gives you a nice breakdown of everything that's being utilized in your CPU right now, what's taking the majority of the processing time in your central processing unit, right? That's your brain, that's what's doing all the calculations, and then you have your memory. So what's interesting about this is you can see the majority. I'm recording this with Zoom. What's taking up not necessarily 30% of my CPU, but 30% of the workload is Zoom. So you can click on these and it'll sort it. So you can see, okay, what has taken the most time. To me, I like to sort it by percentage of the CPU. So you can see kind of what your resource hog is. So what do I have open that's maybe slowing my computer down? And as you can see at the bottom of my screen, the only pieces of software I have open right now is everything that has a little dot under it. And if I want to close it out, I'm going to double click, right click, and hit quit. And by quitting that, so let me, guess I'll quit Safari. So by doing that, you'll see that Safari disappears from the CPU. It's no longer in memory. And what's helpful too, sometimes by memory, you can see all these other processes. Who even knew all that stuff was running, right? Those are going to be a lot of the system software that, again, your operating system is going to spin up in the back end to make sure is running. So you can sort it by user. Sometimes that's helpful to see what's going on, or again, you can do it. What's this one? Memory, just memory. I don't know if it was memory percentage, and see what's taking up the majority of your memory. So what I wanted to show you guys is I use Safari many times. So you can see these are all the websites I frequent. But why I like Safari is I actually like their layout of the bookmarks. So all these are all these different tools and software that we use to manage stuff within the district that I leave here on the bookmarks, and then I can just click it and I can go to it. Okay, well, what you're going to start seeing in the activity monitor is you're going to see these pop up. So I've got Safari. Safari itself's taking about 200 megs. And I went to this umbrella website. So if I decided to open up Schoology, what's going to end up happening if I open up a whole bunch of tabs of the same thing, right? Or even if, okay, so I have this one, maybe I've got this course. What you're going to see, and let me right click on this little green button. I do this sometimes. It'll help split your screen with two different pieces of software. It'll tile it to the right, and then I can hit the activity monitor so I can have both up on the screen. So what you'll see, you see these all start to populate, right? They're starting to take up spots in my memory. The more tabs I open, right, you can see all these, they're all taking up space in RAM. And if I'm not using them, well, why are they there? I have them open. They're kind of, they're just there as kind of a placeholder, but they become stale pages, but they are still going to take up space in RAM. And if you never restart, this never gets flushed. RAM will always have this stuff within it. And if I never close out any programs, what's going to happen? It's going to keep filling and filling and filling, and you only have so much RAM. Usually, I think our computers might have 8 gigs of RAM in them. So if you never close out of anything, you can run into problems. You can have memory leaks, and it can just stop working correctly altogether. So that's the value in restarting your computer, limiting the number of open tabs you have. I'd really limit it to the ones that you're working out of. If there's 4 or 5 that you need for the day, limit it to that. If you're not going to click on it that day, it doesn't need to be open. So, but that is it for me, and I hope that you guys have learned something today.